Next on People in the News, he's the 60-year-old legend who's showing no signs of slowing down.
I always joke that I'll be like 90 and it'll be like wheeling me on. Yesterday.
A rock and roll icon who was devastated by the death of his wife Linda, but he soon discovered that all you need is love.
So I feel very lucky to have found another great woman who I'm in love with.
Now he's on the road with his second Smash tour this year. Husband, rocker, and former Beatle Paul McCartney.
Hi, welcome to People in the News. I'm Paula Zahn. You'd think that people would have had enough of silly love songs, but 40 years after the Beatles released their first single, Love Me Do, Paul McCartney looks around and finds it isn't so. At 60, McCartney is still making music, still recording, still touring, and he's still writing those love songs thanks to renewed inspiration from his new wife, Heather Mills. Here's Kira Phillips.
It's hard to believe, but one of the most famous faces of the 60s has turned 60, and he's not showing any signs of slowing down. Last spring, Driving Rain USA, Paul McCartney's first American tour in almost 10 years, sold out stadium after stadium in 19 cities, bringing in $53 million in just 3 months.
I just play what I like, and I try and please an audience, you know. I do my best, and we're just having a great time. But don't ask me why or how, it just is happening.
Now it's happening again. The rock legend has decided to give it another go.
Towards the end of the tour, we were feeling so good with the band that I just thought, you know, it's rare when you get a really good group of musicians together. I thought, wait a minute, we're going to fold this? This is a pity, you know, hey guys, that was great, see ya. You don't do that with a good band normally.
Back in the U.S., part 2 of the top-grossing tour kicked off in September and is still going strong. But it's not just Sir Paul's professional life that is putting new wind in his sails.
I think my wife, Heather, is a lot to do with it, because it's great to have romance. You know, I'm a very romantic guy, and it really is nice to have a good woman.
The newlyweds are settling in now, happy to be done with the feeding frenzy their June wedding became. But having the rapt attention of the media and the public is nothing new to this former Beatle. From the minute the shaggy-haired British quartet deplaned in New York in 1964 with their matching black suits and impish grins, Beatlemania was born. James Paul McCartney was dubbed the Cute Beatle. Born in Liverpool on June 18, 1942, Paul was musically inclined from the very beginning. He taught himself to play the guitar by listening to records of his favorite American rock and rollers. But it was in 1957, at a church garden party in Liverpool, that it all started to come together. There, Paul heard a 19-year-old playing American rock and roll as the lead singer of a local band, the Quarrymen. His name was John Lennon. That chance meeting led to a partnership that would last 13 years and produce a record number of #1 singles.
They both benefited from each other. John's rough edges were burnished and polished by Paul's gift for entertainment, and John's edginess rubbed off on Paul and gave him an ability to put some certain edginess into his own music.
Paul joined forces with John and George Harrison, a young guitarist he rode the bus to school with every day. And in 1961, when drummer Ringo Starr replaced Pete Best, the Beatles, as we know it, was formed. The Beatles became icons almost overnight.
All 4 Beatles were drawn to making music because they loved music. These days, it's hard to imagine because the average pop star these days is drawn by the idea of fame or money, and making music is a pleasant third or fourth. For the Beatles, that was not the case.
The Fab Four's love of music came across in their first film, A Hard Day's Night. It showcased the foursome's playful attitudes and convinced fans fame and fortune had not changed them at all.
How did you find America?
So I left to Greenland.
I'd like to keep Britain tidy.
They come across very naturally, and we just get the feeling of real guys who love each other very much. They're like 4 8-year-old kids scampering around together. That's what they really are. 4 kids who are best friends.
When People in the News continues, hard days ahead for the Beatles as that friendship begins to unravel.
We now return to People in the News.
Between 1963 and 1967, every single released by the Beatles, from She Loves You to All You Need Is Love, went to #1. But as time went on, there was friction building. The Lennon-McCartney songwriting team was like a pair of competing siblings, always looking to one-up the other.
It's like playing tennis with somebody who's better than you. It constantly raises your level of game. And Paul and John were equals. So when John did a song of a certain kind, Paul would say, well, I'm going to equal him and maybe top him. And the same would happen. Paul would write an amazing song, and John said, well, I got to better that.
The duo was incredibly prolific, writing songs like Ticket to Ride. At first, though, getting their new material down on paper was a bit of a struggle for both Paul and John. Neither of them knew how to read music.
Me and John always used to say, because when we first started, it was before anything like tape cassettes, which we later used to just immediately put it down. So, okay, we remembered it. And we said, what if we forget it? We should say, well, you know what, if we forget it, it can't be much good. How are we going to expect them to remember it if we just wrote it and we forgot it?
Fortunately for them, their technique worked, and the Beatles came out with a string of memorable hits. They traveled the globe and met some of the biggest celebrities of their time. Everyone wanted to meet the Liverpool lads who turned the world on its head. In 1968, an American photographer was sent to capture some of the Beatle magic on film. Only on this assignment, Linda Eastman also captured the attention of one of her subjects.
She photographed Jimi Hendrix, Jim Morrison, you know, the Rolling Stones. She was a big name, and she photographed the Beatles at some event, met Paul, they started talking, they really clicked, and they never spent a day apart after that, essentially.
After a year and a half, the two tried to wed quietly, without much fanfare. Well, it didn't work. Paul and Linda were mobbed by paparazzi and sobbing girls, mourning the loss of the last bachelor Beatle. In 1969, Paul decided to take a little rest from the public eye to spend time with his new family. But his fans, wondering where he'd gone, came to their own rather ominous conclusions.
The notion was that Paul had died in a car accident in 1966, and the Beatles, fearful that their popularity would wane, had drafted in a Scottish actor, given him plastic surgery to make him look like Paul and a voice to sound like Paul, and then miraculously for some reason he then continued to write songs like Paul. It was insane.
We all thought, oh, well, we'll do a photo with Paul, but everyone would have said, well, that's the fake Paul. You know, it was just a bit of crazy rubbish at the time.
Eventually, it took Paul posing on the cover of Life magazine to squash the rumor. Very much alive, Paul was at the height of success with the Beatles, but behind the scenes, tensions were brewing, and the Fab Four could not agree on how to go forward.
They broke up over very different philosophies. Paul really kind of wanted to keep touring, and John wanted to be more of a recording artist in the studio, and lawyers got involved.
Pretty soon, the four close friends couldn't even be in the same room without fighting. In 1970, the Beatles, who had an unparalleled run at the top of the charts, called it quits. Even with 27 #1 songs and 18 years together as friends and partners, they could not mend the divide that had formed between them.
No one will ever know who instigated the breakup. It was ugly, though.
After the split, Paul was devastated, but Linda McCartney encouraged her husband to go back to doing what he did best,
She said, come on, you're a musician, you're a writer, you're an entertainer, let's go.
So in an attempt to forge a new identity with a band of his own, McCartney formed Wings in 1971 with wife Linda.
Paul loved Linda so much and was so devoted to her, and they had such a strong marriage that they could not fathom life apart. That's how in love they were. And he said, if I'm going to have a band and I'm going to tour and I can't live without you, you're going to have to be a part of the band.
It was their band. The billing might have gone Paul McCartney and Wings, but Linda was very much a part of it and very much part of the energy of the group.
To show her support, Linda put down her camera and picked up an instrument.
Linda would be the first to admit that she wasn't a schooled musician, but what she had was a very rock and roll soul.
She was really scared, and she did her best, you know. She was there because Paul needed her there.
Wings was truly a family affair. Kids and pets were always in tow, with Paul and Earth Mother Linda leading the pack.
They'd get a room, there wouldn't be a bed for little Stella or something. They'd open a drawer and throw a pillow in it, and that'd be the bed for Stella. And the kids grew up with every respect in the world, you know. They didn't have things handed to them on a silver platter. They had all the right values established, and it was really neat to watch them as a couple and how they raised their family, you know. It was as equally as well done as Paul's writing and singing abilities.
Defying the odds, Paul McCartney achieved success post-Beatles, but something still was not right. Paul wanted to reconcile with John Lennon, the person who had pushed him artistically and helped him reach his best. In a cruel twist, just as the two began talking again, fate would intervene. On December 8, 1980, an assassin's bullet took the life of John Lennon, the founding member of the Beatles. As he always did during the hard times, Paul leaned on his wife to help him recover from the loss of his friend. But eventually, there would come a time when the roles would be reversed, when he would have to be the strong one. The feisty photographer who was so devoted to her husband and her children was diagnosed with breast cancer. The news was devastating to Paul, who also lost his mother to the disease. After a painful battle, Linda McCartney died in April of 1998.
He essentially cried for a straight year, wept, you know, uncontrollably.
Paul virtually disappeared in the months following Linda's death. Friends and fans wondered if he would ever recover. When People in the News continues, Paul McCartney tries to pick up the pieces and move on.
Welcome back to People in the News.
Former Beatle Paul McCartney is still selling out arenas 40 years after hitting it big.
It's really cool, you know. Let's face it, you know, any band out there, any musician, that's what you want. You know, you rehearse all your life and you practice. You want to go out and you want the people to enjoy what you do. So for me, it's fantastic.
The 60-year-old legend is having a great time now, but just 4 years ago, he was dealing with the death of his wife of 30 years, Linda.
A lot of people said to me, okay, get very busy and throw yourself into work. And I thought, well, I don't really want to do that. So for the first year, I just did what came naturally, and that involved a lot of crying, basically, and a lot of just letting it out.
After a period of mourning, the loving husband and devoted family man was asked the inevitable question, would he find another great love?
I just take things as they come. I think, as I said before, I think Linda would want me to be happy, whatever that involves, you know?
To help heal the wounds of losing Linda, McCartney immersed himself in something completely new, painting. A book of his paintings was published amid much fanfare.
I'm still a musician, I love that, but I do love painting, and so eventually I was like persuaded to show them, you know, just for the people who might like it.
and it seems to have gone down pretty well, except with a couple of snotty critics.
After about a year, Paul McCartney was ready to move on. In 1999, his life took a major turn when he met Heather Mills at a charity event. She was a vocal landmine and disability activist, issues that became painfully personal to her when the former model lost her leg after being run over by a police motorcycle. Paul and Heather developed a relationship, and soon he was helping her lobby to eliminate landmines. After a year-long courtship, a diamond and sapphire ring from India sealed the deal. Paul and Heather became engaged.
After my tragedy with Linda, that really knocked me, you know, like it would knock anyone. So I feel very lucky to have found another great woman who I'm in love with.
But the gossip columns were not as optimistic. They went into overdrive, portraying her as a gold-digging divorcee.
She had a very dicey reputation in London. She was sort of like a love him and leave him type. She had a series of broken engagements, and the man that she was with before, Paul, she was engaged to and broke off the engagement 2 weeks before the wedding.
Nonetheless, Sir Paul McCartney and his new love told the world they planned to wed.
Well, details we're engaged, that's it. That's it. When it's all very private stuff, all that, you know. Anyway, we're standing here for the cameras and we're very happy, and we'll get married sometime next year. That's about it. The details.
And with that, off they went, leaving the pack abuzz, begging for more information. Even though they weren't divulging details on the upcoming wedding, the couple made lots of public appearances. They were at an awards banquet in New York City on September 10th of last year, planning to return home the next morning.
We were on the tarmac at JFK at 8:45 when the captain just sort of stopped the plane and said there's been a terrible accident, and we could see it out of the window. My dad had been a firefighter. That was kind of part of it. As I was seeing the firefighters, I was thinking, God, my dad did that in World War II. So it really brought it home to me, and I thought, well, I want to do something for these people. I'm from New York and for the US.
The legendary songwriter was moved to write the 9/11 anthem, Freedom.
It was very quick, because some songs you don't want to mess around with too much. And in this particular case, it wasn't that I wanted it to be quick, I wanted it to be simple. I thought, I want to come out there, and I want this to be like the debut of the song. And by the second chorus, I want them to know that it goes, freedom! And I'll go, I'm talking about freedom!
Throughout his long career, Paul McCartney has managed to face tragedy and move on.
Paul's always had a relentlessly optimistic slant on life, which is impressive bearing in mind the amount of tragedy he's had. I mean, he lost his mother to breast cancer when he was 14. He lost his wife Linda to breast cancer. He lost John to a murderer, and George recently. So he's dealt with a lot of sadness. But he's cheerful. He takes that attitude. He has a positivism, which I think is why he looks so sprightly for a man of his advanced years.
This past June, the eternal optimist was full of energy and vitality, preparing for his wedding to Heather Mills.
What we're going to do is basically a family wedding, so we're going to have family and friends, and we're just going to have a bit of fun, and we won't be up. Hello. So there you are. Thank you very much for your support, and we'll see you. Thank you. All right? Now, if you didn't get that, you didn't get it.
After months of rumors and speculation on both sides of the Atlantic, the ceremony was finally held at remote Castle Leslie in Glasgow, Ireland. The newlyweds are enjoying domestic bliss, with Sir Paul spending his mornings fixing breakfast and midday snacks for his new bride. But Paul McCartney will never be a homebody.
He can't stay off the road. He's a road dog. He loves to get up there and do what he does. I had to tell him, hey, you're 60. You're not supposed to be looking this good, playing this good.
Right now, he's on the road again. His U.S. tour continues through the end of October. Anything after that is a question mark.
I always said, you know, people say, when will you retire? I mean, I think it's like everyone. You do that when you've had enough, when you're fed up. At the moment, I'm not fed up. And I always do, you know, joke that I'll be like 90 and they'll be like wheeling me on. Yesterday. One person in the audience. Good. Thank you. I love you.
Next month, Paul McCartney will headline a tribute concert to his late friend George Harrison. McCartney will be joined by fellow Beatle Ringo Starr.